The movie kicks off with a band performing at a cozy island cafe known as Island. The cafe's owner, a guy named Alvarez, takes a liking to Nora, the lead singer of the band. Alvarez invites her to his table, showering her with compliments about her beauty and singing voice. He's so impressed that he offers Nora a 1-year contract, tripling her pay, to perform at the cafe every Saturday night. Nora is thrilled and agrees right away. Shortly after, Alvarez asks a bartender to bring some wine for Nora. Unfortunately, the bartender accidentally spills wine on her dress. Fortunately, Nora takes it in stride and says she can change clothes. But Alvarez isn't pleased. He's hosting an important guest and doesn't want them to see someone with a stained dress. Shockingly, he ruthlessly kills the bartender right in front of Nora. This terrifies Nora, and she realizes that Alvarez is a dangerous individual. As it turns out, Alvarez is not just an ordinary cafe owner. He's the leader of a powerful mafia in America. He's been residing on the island for 4 years, using it as a base to expand his illegal activities. Now the story shifts to Los Angeles, where we meet Police Chief Mark and his deputy Phil. They are undercover, posing as fake criminals planning to engage in shady dealings at the airport. Soon, the real criminals, along with their accomplice, arrive. Mark approaches the main dealer to apprehend him and seize the illegal goods, while Phil prepares to hand over the money. However, things take an unexpected turn when Phil decides to turn the tables and launches an attack. Mark's friend, the dealer, stirs up trouble, sparking a major brawl. Suddenly, Mark's cell phone rings. It's his mom calling from their hometown. She delivers devastating news. His brother has been discovered dead. Overwhelmed by this heart-wrenching revelation, Mark rushes back to his island hometown. Upon his swift arrival, Mark attends his brother's funeral, only to learn that his younger sibling was the bartender tragically killed by Alvarez not long ago. Mark's mom is devastated by the loss of her youngest child. Whispers circulate that gangsters might be behind the murder, as Mark's brother was returning home from work when the incident occurred. Even Alvarez and his associates are under suspicion. At the funeral, 2 henchmen approach Mark to express their sympathies. After the service concludes, Mark and his mother return home. As they reminisce, flipping through old photos of him and his brother, Mark realizes it's been 11 years since he last set foot on the island. His responsibilities as a police chief had kept him away. With a solemn vow, he determines to avenge his brother's death. The next day, Mark heads to the island's police station and goes straight to the police chief, who turns out to be his childhood friend, B. They share a deep acquaintance, and B offers his condolences for the loss of Mark's younger brother. He assures Mark that they will promptly initiate an investigation into the case. Curious about any leads on the killer's identity, Mark asks B for information. B explains that they only know the culprits are gangsters, but uncovering which gang is responsible will take time due to the numerous gangs operating on the island. During his visit, Mark unexpectedly crosses paths with Akila, a female martial arts trainer who happens to be his ex-girlfriend. Interestingly, she is visibly thrilled to see him after an 11-year absence. During their conversation, Akila offered her condolences for Mark's brother's passing. Mark inquired about his brother's daily routines and any potential involvement with the gang. Akila admitted uncertainty regarding the current gangs on the island, as many had emerged after Mark's departure. However, she did mention that his younger brother had collaborated with an American named Alvarez. Surprisingly, Akila disclosed that Alvarez was more than he seemed. He was, in fact, a mafia boss. She revealed that his cafes were mere facades, concealing his true operation involving illegal goods and weapons. Learning this shocking revelation, Mark's suspicions about Alvarez grew, and he resolved to confront him. Before departing, Mark asked Akila to look after his mother and ensure her safety. Shortly after, Mark headed to Alvarez's cafe, where he encountered Alvarez's right-hand man, who initially blocked his way. Alvarez himself granted Mark entry. Wasting no time, Mark confronted Alvarez about his brother's death. In response, Alvarez spun a tale, claiming that Mark's brother had been killed by outsiders while returning from a late-night shift. Mark, unconvinced, sternly warned Alvarez that he would never forgive him if he was connected to the crime. Alvarez, unfazed, chuckled and dismissed Mark's threats, underlining that Mark was just an ordinary cop. Nonetheless, Alvarez did provide Mark with a lead. He disclosed the location of a cafe frequented by gangsters, suggesting that Mark inquire there to uncover information about his brother's death. Upon leaving Alvarez, he ordered his right-hand man to assemble gang members from the north to deal with Mark later that night. Meanwhile, Mark paid a visit to his best friend, who managed a hot dog stand. Inquiring about some weapons he had entrusted to his friend, Mark was informed that the weapons had been hidden in an abandoned building near the beach. As the story unfolded, it became evident that during their teenage years, Mark and his best friend had been influential figures on the island, but their paths diverged when Mark left for Los Angeles. The island became a magnet for foreign gangs, and the mafia seeking control. Mark's best friend anticipated Mark's quest for vengeance, ready to aid him whenever necessary. Following this, Mark made his way to an abandoned building near the beach and unearthed the hidden weapons his best friend had stashed. As evening descended, Mark reached the cafe mentioned by Alvarez. Swiftly silencing the music, he confronted the gangsters regarding his brother's killer. However, they didn't take kindly to his accusations, and a fight ensued. Remarkably, Mark skillfully managed to best them, leaving the gangsters defeated. Once more, he demanded to know who was responsible for his brother's murder. The gang leader vehemently denied any involvement in harming the locals. Suddenly, a group of gangsters from the north, acting on Alvarez's orders, stormed in. opening fire on Mark. Fortunately, he narrowly evaded the bullets, setting off a frantic chase. Amid the pursuit, Mark managed to incapacitate one of his pursuers. Eventually, he found a hiding spot, eluding the gangsters until they lost track of him. Alvarez contacted his gang to inform them they had lost track of Mark. This news infuriated Alvarez, leading him to order his gang to harm Mark's mother. Shortly thereafter, they reached Mark's house and forcefully entered, firing at what they believed to be Mark's sleeping mother. Upon closer examination, they realized it was merely a pillow. Aquila, Mark's ex-girlfriend, had taken precautions to safeguard Mark's mother. Later on, we see Mark and B, the police chief, inspecting the crime scene at Mark's residence. During this time, Mark couldn't help but wonder that if he hadn't entrusted his mother to Aquila, she might have fallen victim to the attack. Then, B informed Mark that he had just received information from his informant regarding his brother's murder. Surprisingly, there was a witness from back then, a female singer named Nora. B disclosed that Nora currently resides in a motel near the church, occupying room number 18. The next day, we find Mark heading to Nora's room. Initially, Nora hesitates to open the door, worried that Mark might be one of Alvarez's associates. Without delay, Mark displays his police badge to reassure her that he poses no threat. Eventually, Nora opens up. They begin a conversation. Mark promises Nora that he'll assist her in leaving the island safely, provided she's willing to disclose the true identity of the person responsible for the bartender's murder, who, as it turns out, was Mark's younger sibling. Nervously, Nora admits that Alvarez killed Mark's brother over a spilled glass of wine on her dress. She reveals that she's been trapped on the island because Alvarez fears she might report the crime to the police. Upon learning this shocking truth, Mark takes swift action. Nora eventually leaves her room and meets up with B. Mark then requests me to accompany Nora to the pier, ensuring her safe departure from the island. Subsequently, B drives Nora to the pier while Mark begins crafting his plans for revenge against Alvarez due to his brother's death. Now the narrative shifts to Alvarez, who instructs his trusted mercenaries to hunt down Mark. A few hours later, these mercenaries arrive on the island and head directly to Mark's house in search of him. Meanwhile, Mark, his mother, and Aquila are gathered at his home. During this time, Mark decides to leave his mother under Aquila's care. As he prepares to confront Alvarez, suddenly the sound of an approaching car catches their attention. It's the team of mercenaries dispatched by Alvarez. Quickly, Mark seizes a weapon and leads his mother and Aquila to the rear of the house. Among the mercenaries, 2 remain by the car while the other 2 proceed to enter the house. Inside, these 2 mercenaries discover signs suggesting that Mark has gone around the back of the house, prompting them to give chase. During the pursuit, the 2 mercenaries manage to catch up to Mark, resulting in an exchange of gunfire. Meanwhile, the other 2 mercenaries guarding the car encounter B, leading to an abrupt gunfight. B successfully manages to drive them away. On the other hand, Mark attempts to subdue one of the mercenaries while the other escapes. B contacts Mark to check on his whereabouts, and Mark responds that he's currently safeguarding his mother and Aquila at his best friend's house, who happens to sell hot dogs. Shortly after that, the scene shifts to Alvarez and his right-hand man, who find themselves in a hotel room on the hunt for Nora. Alvarez is enraged upon discovering Nora's absence, and doesn't hesitate to take down the hotel guard for failing to protect her. We then return to Mark, who arrives at his best friend's place and quickly leaves his mother and Aquila there. His determination to seek revenge for his brother's death at the hands of Alvarez is unwavering. A friendly hot dog seller warmly welcomes Mark's mother and Aquila. However, as Mark is about to depart, Aquila insists on joining him. Mark attempts to dissuade her, but her determination prevails, leading them to decide to confront the challenge together. In the evening, Mark and Aquila patiently await the arrival of Chief of Police B. They've devised a plan with B to confront Alvarez together. B arrives in his car, but curiously he remains inside. Concerned, Mark and Aquila approach the vehicle. To their shock, they discover B severely wounded. Suddenly, gunfire erupts, revealing an attack from Alvarez's remaining 3 mercenaries. In the chaos, the mercenaries manage to capture Aquila, while Mark does his utmost to assist the dying B. During this critical moment, B urges Mark to persist in the fight for justice, and to protect the island from ruthless individuals like Alvarez before he passed away. The following day, at a local church, we see the community attending a service. Shortly after, Mark arrives and addresses the congregation with fervor, uniting them against the oppression imposed by outsiders. He rallies everyone to unite and confront Alvarez, the mastermind behind illicit activities. This time, it's not just Mark's brother, but also Chief of Police B and the kidnapped Aquila who have suffered due to Alvarez's actions. Upon hearing Mark's words, the residents agree to join forces and stand up against Alvarez. Afterward, Mark heads to the police station, temporarily taking over Chief B's role. There, he gathers his fellow officers and stresses their new mission. As Mark focused on gathering information about Alvarez, his attention was suddenly captured by Phil, his police partner from Los Angeles. Phil had intentionally sought out Mark, worried about his prolonged absence from Los Angeles. In response, Mark explained that he wouldn't return until he had confronted Alvarez, the man responsible for his brother's death, and the abduction of Aquila. Phil wholeheartedly joined Mark's cause, considering Mark's problem as his own. Later that afternoon, Alvarez reached out to Mark, seemingly having pieced together that Mark was involved in Nora's escape. Alvarez proposed a meeting at 7 a.m. the next day for a trade, Nora for Aquila. Alvarez promised that, following this exchange, he would leave Mark alone on the condition that Mark agreed to put everything behind him. Though Mark reluctantly agreed to Alvarez's terms, deep down, he knew that true forgiveness wouldn't come until he had exacted his revenge. To complicate matters, Nora had already left the island, making it impossible for Mark to bring her to the exchange scheduled for the following morning. Shortly after this, Mark reached out to Phil and asked him to assemble a team from the local police force. He appointed Phil as the team leader with the mission to rescue Aquila from Alvarez's clutches. As their scheduled 7 a.m. meeting with Alvarez approached, Phil agreed to follow Mark's instructions. On the appointed day, Mark waited at the designated meeting spot to meet Alvarez, while Phil and his police team attempted to infiltrate Alvarez's headquarters to free Aquila. They encountered one of Alvarez's mercenaries, but Phil managed to swiftly eliminate the threat. Meanwhile, Mark found himself face-to-face with Alvarez and one of his trusted associates. Alvarez wasted no time asking about Nora's location. In response, Mark resorted to a little white lie, claiming that Nora would arrive once Aquila showed up. He used this fib to buy more time while he nervously awaited updates from Phil, who was in the midst of rescuing Aquila. The scene then shifts to Phil's predicament. He had located Aquila, but found himself staring down the barrel of a mercenary's gun. In that tense moment, his choices were limited, and he chose to surrender. Fortunately, they eventually managed to eliminate the mercenaries. Phil quickly relayed to Mark that Aquila was safe with him. Upon hearing this, Mark assured Phil that Nora was safe in Los Angeles, and had no plans to return to the island. Alvarez made a menacing threat to harm Aquila unless Mark complied. In a composed tone, Mark revealed that Alvarez's henchmen were no longer a threat, having been dealt with. This revelation angered Alvarez, leading him to command his right-hand man to shoot Mark. However, Mark skillfully incapacitated Alvarez's right-hand man. Just when the situation appeared to be taking a dangerous turn, an unexpected twist occurred. Out of nowhere, the hot dog seller and the local island residents emerged, encircling Alvarez with their weapons. Mark called for everyone to lower their arms and proposed a duel with Alvarez to settle their differences once and for all. Reluctantly, Alvarez agreed to the challenge. The duel commenced, with Mark mirroring the actions Alvarez had taken against his younger brother in an earlier scene. Subsequently, Mark and Aquila shared an intimate moment on the beach, signaling that they were officially a couple again, and planning to marry in the near future. Shortly after, Phil extended an invitation for Mark to return to Los Angeles, but Mark declined. He expressed his commitment to remain on the island, safeguarding it from outsiders seeking control. With this decision, the film concludes. The moral lesson derived from the film: always be cautious, especially when spilling wine on someone's dress, as you never know who might turn out to be a hidden mafia boss, and things could spiral out of control.